phi201. You're welcome to study session 5. Traditional account of knowledge. Introduction. In this study session, we will be focusing on the traditional account of knowledge. This is how knowledge was traditionally conceptualized. We will also be looking at the necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge, learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. State the traditional account of knowledge. 2. Discuss the analysis of S knows that P. 3. Point out the condition for knowledge. Standard account of knowledge. The need to arrive at a set of conditions which are individually necessary and jointly sufficient for knowledge has led a philosopher called Gettier, 1963, to formulate the traditional account of knowledge. The standard account of knowledge, around which all recent works in epistemology have been done, defines knowledge as justified through belief. It holds that S knows that P if and only if 1. P is true. 2. S believes that P. 3. S is justified in believing that P. These three parts are called the tripartite definition of knowledge, or the justified through belief account of knowledge. Gettier's position concerning the tripartite conception of knowledge is that it is possible for someone not to know even when all the three conditions are satisfied. Also, he allows that they are individually necessary and argues that they need supplementing. Gettier's counterexample is one in which S has a justified but false belief by inference, by which it justifiably believes something which happens to be true, and so arrives at a justifiable true belief, which is not knowledge. What we need here is an analysis of S knows that P. Analysis of S knows that P. The first condition, generally called the true condition, says that you cannot know that something is true if in fact it is false. So if you are to know that P, then P must be true. The second condition needs thorough explanation. The mere fact that P is true does not guarantee that S knows it. There must be some connection between S and P. S must have some sort of mental relation to P, but this relation has to be of a certain kind. It is no use, for instance, if S wonders whether P, or fears that P, or hopes that P. If S is to know that P, S must accept that P is true, or, as the second condition says, S must believe that P. It is easy to misunderstand this second condition because in ordinary life, we often seem to contrast knowledge with belief as if they are mutually exclusive. John might say, I don't believe that my name is John. I know that it is, and this seems to suggest that knowledge and belief are incompatible states. The term belief in ordinary use often carries suggestions about the inconclusive nature of the evidence which we have, as when people contrast matters of belief with matters of fact. Sometimes it carries religious connotations. A person who describes himself as a believer does not mean that he holds a belief of one kind or the other. It means that he accepts some religious claims, but none of the ordinary association of the world. Belief is present in the second condition of the traditional account of knowledge. The condition is not implying that S is uncertain of the truth of P, or that she lacks evidence for P, or that P has a religious content. All it is saying is that she accepts P. What his grounds are, if any, and what the strength of her conviction is left undetermined by the second condition. In this usage, believing something covers the spectrum of case, ranging from thinking that it is more probable than not being absolutely certain of it. One may want to ask at this point that there are these two conditions by themselves sufficient for the truth of S knows that P. We, in other words, equate knowledge with true belief. According to the JTB analysis, there are possible cases which show that true belief is not sufficient for knowledge. For sometimes, a person's belief is true just by chance or by luck. If a person bets regularly on horses and says, "I just know that one day I am going to have a big win," we would not say that she knew what she claimed to know, even if one day she did have a big win. We might say that she believed that she would have a big win, or that she was sure that she would have a big win. But intuitively, we think that such a case would not be an example of knowledge. Do we then need another condition that is capable of turning belief into knowledge? It seems another condition is needed to prevent cases in which a knower's true belief is true just by chance or just a matter of luck. There must be some sort of connection between the fact that knowers believes that P and the fact that P is true. According to the JTB account, this connection is supplied by the idea of good justification. The trouble with the gambler from the point of view of knowing is that she has no justification for her belief that she will win. Unless she has a good justification for her belief, she is guilty of wishful thinking. When we talk about justification in epistemology, we are talking about epistemic justification, in which one is justified in holding a belief if and only if one has some good reasons to think that the belief is true, and indeed a better reason to think that it is true than that it is false. Gettier-style example. Gettier provided a criticism of the traditional account of knowledge in a short but very influential paper. He provided examples of beliefs which were both true and apparent, adequately justified, but which did not amount to knowledge. If his argument is correct, then we know that the traditional account, as it stands, will not do as a complete analysis of propositional knowledge, for it would not be given sufficient conditions for the truth of S knows that P. That is, the conditions could be met and the knowledge claim would still be false. Let us then see what Gettier's style example is like. Suppose that Mr. John's son tells him that he has just bought a car. Mr. John knows that his son is an honest person and can think of no reason why he should be deceiving him in this matter. So, on the basis of what his son has told him, Mr. John comes to believe that his son has just bought a car. So when Mr. John meets his friend and his friend says to him, "I heard that someone in your family has just bought a car," Mr. John replies, "Yes, I know that someone in my family has just bought a car." But there are two facts unknown to Mr. John. The first is that very unusually, his son on this occasion was lying. He had not just bought a car. The second fact unknown to Mr. John is that his wife, Mrs. John, has just bought a car, but secretly. The question now is, when Mr. John says to his friend, "I know that someone in my family has just bought a car," is what he says true? Does he really have knowledge? As far as our discussion goes, we can see that in the above example, the three conditions specified by the traditional analysis are all met. First, it is true that someone in Mr. John's family has just bought a car, namely Mrs. John. Secondly, Mr. John certainly believes that someone in his family has just bought a car. Thirdly, it appears that Mr. John has adequate justification for his belief, since his source of information is his son, who we are told is very honest and who further has no motive that Mr. John knows of for being deceitful in this particular case. So Mr. John does have an adequately justified true belief that someone in his family has just bought a car. And yet, so Gettier objection goes, Mr. John does not know this. So knowledge cannot be equated with justified true belief. The aim of Gettier's objection is to show that the three conditions offered by the traditional account of knowledge are not sufficient for knowledge. This Gettier did by trying to show that there can be cases, that is, our intuition tells us that there are possible cases in which the three conditions are met, and yet in which we still do not have a case of knowledge. There is therefore the need for a fourth condition. The need for a fourth condition of knowledge. Since the three necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge as specified by the traditional account of knowledge is inadequate, there is therefore need for a fourth condition. A possible candidate for the fourth condition is infallibilism. To qualify as an item of knowledge, a belief must not only be true and justified, the justification of the belief must necessitate its truth. In other words, the justification for the belief must be infallible. Another possible candidate for the fourth condition of knowledge is indefeasibility. Defeasibility theory maintains that there should be no overriding or defeating truth for the reason that justifies one's belief. For instance, suppose Mr. Kent believes he saw Daniel steal a book from the library and uses this to justify the claim that Daniel stole a book. A possible defeater or overriding proposition for such a claim could be a true proposition like, Daniel's identical twin, Robert, is currently in the same town as Daniel. So long as a defeater of one's justification exists, a subject would not be epistemologically justified. In the case of Mr. John, when we look at what is it about him that prevents him from having knowledge, we will realize that he is unaware that his son is lying to him. If he became aware of this fact, then he would no longer be justified in believing that someone in his family has just bought a car. His belief, that is, that someone in his family has just bought a car, would of course still be true. That is, remember that it is Mrs. John who has just bought a car. But it is his belief that his son has just bought a car which functions as his justification. If he were to discover the truth about his son, this would undermine or defeat the justification he has for thinking that someone in his family has bought a car. What knowledge requires is not that one should have a well-justified true belief, but further, that one's belief should not be susceptible to being undermined or defeated by any truth of which one is currently unaware. In short, that one's justification should be undefeatable or indefeasible. We can define indefeasible justification in a more formal way like this. S believes that P is indefeasibly justified if only and if there is no further fact, Q, such that if she came to believe Q, she would no longer be justified in believing that P. The third candidate for the fourth condition is reliabilism. Reliabilism is a theory advanced by philosophers such as Alvin Goldman, 1986, according to which a belief is justified, that is, or otherwise supported in such a way as to count towards knowledge, only if it is produced by processes that typically yields a sufficiently high ratio of truth to false beliefs. According to reliabilist account of knowledge, what makes a true belief a case of knowledge is not that the knower has a justification for it, but that it has been produced in a certain way. For a belief to count as knowledge, it must be caused by a generally reliable process. Everett and Fisher, 1995, define the reliability of a method as the tendency or disposition of the method to give right answers in general. So the reliability of a method attaches to the run of answers which the method yields. It cannot attach to any individual answer. What attaches to any individual answer is correctness or incorrectness. And a method which only reliable in general will, on occasion, give incorrect answers. The final candidate for the fourth condition is the causal analysis. This condition explains that what distinguishes cases of knowledge from cases of true belief is not just justification, as seen in the justified true belief account of knowledge, but the causal connection of the belief. If a true belief has the right to such causal connection, then it is knowledge. If it has the wrong sort of causal connection, it is merely true belief. And what makes the causal connection of a belief the right sort of causal connection is that they connect belief to the event which belief is about. In the case of Mr. John's family and their car, Mr. John's belief that someone in his family has bought a car is caused by his sons telling him that he has bought a car. In the case of Mr. John's family and their car, Mr. Jones believes that someone in his family has just bought a car is caused by his sons telling him that he has bought a car, in combination with his background belief that his son is very honest and reliable. Why the son lies in this case does not matter, but we were told that the son did not buy a car, and so it could not have been the event of the son's buying a car which caused Mr. Jones' belief that someone in the family had just bought a car. By contrast, the event which does make Mr. Jones believe true, that is, namely, that Mrs. John has just bought a car, is causally unconnected with Mr. Jones' belief that someone has just bought a car. It is not because of Mrs. John's purchase that Mr. John holds this belief that he does. By contrast, imagine that the position slightly changed. Suppose that Mr. John's son did buy a car and told his father so. Then, given the honesty of the son and his lack of motive for lying in this particular case, we surely would say that Mr. John knew that someone in his family had just bought a car. On the causal analysis, Mr. John's belief would amount to knowledge in this case because it is directly caused by the very event which makes it true. It is caused by what the son says to Mr. John, and that in turn by the son's purchase of the car. So Mr. John's belief that someone in the family has bought a car is caused by someone in the family buying a car. The two contrasting examples above suggest that a causal analysis might be able to explain why some cases of true belief are cases of knowledge, and some are not, by reference to the causal connections of the belief. This implies that the causal origin of true belief is more important from the point of view of knowledge. Study session summary. In this study session, you have learned the traditional account of knowledge, specify 3 necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge. We learned that these 3 conditions are inadequate by looking at Gettier-style examples, which serves to explain that the 3 conditions for knowledge may obtain and still a person may not be said to know. As a result of this inadequacy, we saw the need for a 4th condition. We examined 4 concepts of this 4th condition. These are infallibilism, indivisibility, reliability, and the causal analysis. We have come to the end of study session 5. Thanks for listening.